and welcome to ECCB Connects. Social partners, government officials, and representatives from financial institutions across the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union came together at the ECCB Headquarters on 15 February for the second Growth and Resilience Dialogue, which was held under the theme, Working Together to Raise Growth Levels and Build Resilience in the ECCU. Professor Lino Briguglio, Director of the Island and Small States Institute of the University of Malta, was the keynote speaker. He shared his experience on the lessons for resilience of small states in the face of frequently occurring natural disasters and man-made phenomena. Director General of the OECS Commission, His Excellency Dr. Didicus Jules, and Kevin Hope, economist at the Caribbean Development Bank, shared their perspectives on the topic, working together to achieve resilience in the face of vulnerability across the OECS, with focus on building resilience after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Following the presentations, the participants worked in groups to identify challenges in the current economic climate and share insights on building resilience to strengthen development investments and facilitate sustainable growth. The working groups focused on 4 areas: strengthening institutions for growth and sustainability, building resilience in financial sector markets, developing human resource capacity for growth and sustainability, and building climate-smart resilient infrastructure in the OECS. In this episode of ECCB Connects, we share with you the reports from the Growth and Resilience Dialogue working groups.
Okay, the challenges that we have here include lack of financial inclusion, access to credit or finance, a long-standing issue within the MSME sector, which then leads to an increase for requests for state lending or grants. All right, our next issue is idle capital in the banking system, capacity to assist with sensitization, retaining intellectual capital, and compliance requirements, which speaks to de-risking and corresponding banking relations.
We considered value propositions for the finance sector, realizing that with the changing financial environment, public awareness, how do we reorientate our societies to understand the shift in the financial landscape was very crucial to our discussion. So the first action that we looked at, lack of financial inclusion in terms of access to credit. This is the documentation that we received prior to today's dialogue spoke to MSME access to finance quite a bit. So it's something that keeps recurring and has been recurring for the last, I would say, 7 to 10 years, access to credit, access to finance. One of the interventions that we came up with in our limited time period was to create an ecosystem which encourages savers to become equity investors. And now you understand why we need the cultural reorientation. Financial institutions would look at putting excess liquidity into projects for small enterprises to enable and support growth within the region. The expected outcome is increased access to finance with fostered economic management and fiscal management by MSMEs, hopefully propelling greater economic growth. As we all know, the small businesses are the drivers of economic stimulation.
Our key performance indicators include increasing equity investments by holders of funds to the users, and improved performance or responsiveness of banks, as well as reduction in NPLs. Our collaborating partners include the ECCB and the Currency Union, local banking associations, social partners seeking to increase public awareness.
Action 2. We looked at the issue of compliance requirements, de-risking, and corresponding banking relations. It's a severe risk for our region. Not too long ago, Belize faced a shutdown for about 2 weeks' worth of business due to de-risking and corresponding banking relations being removed. It did cause a fallout effect on their financial sector. One of the interventions we looked at was to create and align independent national policies and regulations inclusive of legislation, and as well as an ICT regulatory framework to protect the finance ICT corridor. We are moving towards mobile financing. Banks' financial performances and capabilities will be enhanced, therefore allowing them to compete and be acknowledged on the international stage.
Right now, we're going to look at the key performance indicators, which would be the removal of the risk-oriented nature of the region with reduced risks observed at plenary, that is CFATF. Insurance de-risk due to compliant parameters and independent reviews indicating compliance alignments. Our partners that will be assisting with this, government, regulatory authorities, financial sector, inclusive of OFIs, DNFBs, etc.
And OFI is another financial institution, a remittance company. A DNFB would be an institution that is not recognized within the banking sector or the insurance sector or the OFI sector. Action 3, we looked at the issue of retaining intellectual capital. It was a point that was raised and everybody had to take a step back and think about that one. We had not really looked at it, and it's a very holistic approach to the financial system. Inventing a holistic approach of utilizing the region's performing arts, history, and culture to sell ourselves, not to prostitute ourselves, but to market and sell who we are and what we are and turn it into an advantage for us. Coming out of that, you would look at a more formalized private sector, incentivized for the registering of intellectual property. There's always that phraseology, well, I don't want to share my idea because they are going to steal it. And that comes from a lack of understanding of the necessity of intellectual property rights and what it can afford to you as a business owner. And within the finance sector, we believe that access to finance is directly correlated to having an understanding of what you own is yours if you copyright it.
Key performance indicators, reduction in the informal sector creating a wider tax base, less migration amongst professionals, and tourism revenue-related benefits such as innovators and entrepreneur investments. Social partners, especially educational institutions, culture divisions, chambers, and performing associations.
Our last challenge that we addressed was government's lack of capacity to assist, which came up earlier in this morning's set of presentations. The intervention, which was also mentioned earlier, was government's practice of prudent fiscal responsibilities, another item that was mentioned earlier. So we're technically just compiling what you yourselves have already stated. Better administration of public finances and less dependence on the banking system and financial entities for our financial needs.
Performance indicators, better fiscal and macroeconomic performance, improving debt to GDP ratios, creating a fiscal space to undertake development resilient programs. So partners include governments and IFIs.
An IFI would be an international finance entity such as the IMF or the World Bank. Thank you very much.
The first action we identified was that there would need to be a review and upgrading of the system via a roadmap that would outline the growth that was necessary. So the expected outcome of this action would be that there is an identifiable strategic framework. And our key performance indicator that we identified for that action would be that the strategy and action plan, there was a report on it, and that it was developed, it was written out. The collaborating partners would be our social partners. So social partners inclusive of the NGOs, the private sector, and of course the government, because you would have the various ministries that would be assigned with the different things that would be needed. Our second action was that we would conduct a skills assessment and audit on a national level in a regional framework. So the skills assessment would be conducted by each country, and then we would get together regionally to see who's missing what and how we could supplement each other's needs. The expected outcome of this action was that the skills gaps would be identified so that we could fulfill the needs.
So now the key performance indicator, they're going to be an increase in the percentage, they're going to be an assessment and audit report with recommendation. So you're going to do an assessment and audit report of all the technical skills needed, and from that assessment, we're going to provide recommendations. And of course, the collaborating partners are the social partners.
The next one would be that the Ministry of Education would then ensure that secondary schools integrate the vocational studies into the curriculum via CVQ. So then the expected outcome would be that the labor force would be equipped to meet the demands of the market. by including these practical skills in the curriculum?
The key performance indicator in this one is that there is an increase in the percentage of technical-oriented graduates as opposed to strictly academic-based graduates. So now there is a balance, and of course, there is a greater performance of technical-oriented graduates. Collaborating partners, social partners, and of course, the Ministry of Education has to play an integral role in that.
And the fourth action we identified was that we establish a national comprehensive apprenticeship program that encapsulates personal development and training. So, for example, the soft skills that we might be lacking as we enter the world of employment, or even the technical skills that we would be lacking. So the expected outcome would be that there's a larger pool of prospective employees.
And specifically for this action, it targets youth in particular. Now there is sort of outcry from the private sector in particular that we produce a lot of quote-unquote bright graduates, but they're not professional. They don't have the soft skills. They don't know how to communicate, etc. So when you marry in that program, when you marry the academic development with the soft skills and the training, they're more employable. The key performance indicator, there is increased productivity, competitiveness. There's a reduction in the employment, specifically in entrepreneurship. So what you do, you foster a culture of entrepreneurship. So the young people are equipped with the training and the skills and a sense of business-minded, so they can delve in that arena. And of course, the social partners is the collaborating partners. There is a call for the private sector that you create more internship opportunities. We understand with the economic climate that the internship that you provide is dwindling, but we advise you to please provide more internship opportunities for the youth, because of course there is outcry in the private sector that you send out again the graduates and they're not being able to perform. So can you because it's a partnership. This program, of course, the government will play a major role, but you, the private sector, you have to play your role in terms of internship and so forth.
Our first action or intervention is the development or to enforce land use policies across the region. Now, this is, in effect, to islands which don't have, or islands which have, or which is just as draft policy, but we need to get it enforced. So the expected outcome would be better urban and rural infrastructural planning. The key performance indicators would be policy, legislated, and implemented. Action 2 is harmonize building codes across the region, because the investors spoke about or brought up this key point that maybe an investor or wants to invest in a certain island and doesn't get a certain attribute or doesn't get a certain permission. But because another island has the availability or will allow the investor to go there, then they will lose the investment. So what we have to do is be harmonized across the region. Our expected outcome would be an improved or resilient infrastructure that can withstand the effects of the present climate change and disasters. Next one is key performance indicators is institutional buildings conform to codes. Codes are passed into law. Action 3 is capacity building with the use of appropriate technology. Capacity building came across as a cross-cutting theme where we need to actually attribute it to each of our different goals. Because without us building capacity from within, then we will never be able to be self-sustainable. Communities has to be better able to respond to the effects of climate change. And that has to be even prior, during, and after a storm. Key performance indicators are reducing unemployment among at-risk youth. Also, the establishment of a certified apprenticeship system which can be governed all across the Caribbean. The fourth action, which we noted down, is the establishment of a regional resilience fund. And our expected outcome is the ability for the region to respond more effectively in the short term. Also, indicators are commitment of member states to contribute up to 0.5% of GDP. We even had an argument for that. We should be 5% or maybe more, or even maybe less, 0.001 or something like that came up. But we stayed at 5, and then we make adjustments along the way. Also, number 2 is establishment of criteria for allocation of the fund. So we need to have a set criteria. Now, universally, we realize that all stakeholders should be involved in the process. So our key partners definitely are the central government, the ECCB, also the OECS Secretariat, the civil society, youth, builder society partners. And like we outlined, our overall aim is basically to be a self-sustaining region, where ourselves can find the capacity from within, through time, through effort, through working, so that we can develop our region together. And in closing, we have our timeline. Since we know time is of the essence because the process has begun and we need to continue the process, we said that all our targets should be started at least by this year of June of 2018 and also be reviewed throughout the year, and then we'll make adjustments as we go through. I thank you.
One of the things that was highlighted that was lacking in our institutional architecture is evidence-based policy formulation. Not that it's absent, but it's not sufficiently provided and sufficiently done. And one of the things that was highlighted as being an impediment to evidence-based policy formulation is the fact that a lot of times the data that exists is locked up in silos. Particular government entity or institution may have its data sets for operation, and it's not available to other arms of government or even private sector entities for the purpose of interrogating to inform a particular question. So we figured a concrete action that could be taken in that regard is an open data policy that provides some sort of guidelines and some sort of framework in which data can be shared in a manner that would provide access to the greatest number of persons wishing to interrogate it, to research it, and so on. And in terms of a key performance indicator, there would be greater access to data for analysis. And we have identified the collaborating partners, of course, the ECCB, CDB, OECS, NSOs, World Bank, IMF. Another area that we found was lacking was the whole area of continuity in government policy. Essentially, governments may change, and then the country was, or the government was going down a particular trajectory, and then a whole new trajectory emerges. You have to start over from scratch. And so a concrete action that we figure can assist in terms of ensuring continuity is the institutionalizing of social partnership platforms for dialogue. And the expected outcome, strengthening of the ecosystem for continuity of policy. And in terms of key performance indicators, we'll be looking at things that reflects the operationalizing of that partnership. So, for example, that it meets at a certain periodicity, quarterly meetings. Several collaborating partners, of course, the government, the public sector, private entities, business, NGOs, CBOs, BSOs, would all be part of the collaborating partners. Another area that really got a lot of attention was the whole idea of follow-through on key policy decisions. It was felt that decisions are taken, and a number of times these decisions require the collaboration of not just one ministry, but several ministries to execute. And the way the government architecture is set up is not really set up for that sort of action. So we wanted to recommend something that's fairly generic that allows member states to configure it how they may wish. We recommend the establishment of an oversight committee for implementation. In terms of expected outcome, we expect to see improved follow-through on key policy decisions. And in terms of measuring it, in terms of a key performance indicator, we would probably could use a time-bound measure where once you have identified these key decisions that it takes 2 quarters to implement or to start. The partners in that instance would be mainly public entities, whether central government or the wider public sector. But it could also be broadened to include key private sector entities, maybe like a chamber, etc., depending on probably the matter. So you probably could have a flexibility in composition. And the last action, there's need for a diagnostic evaluation of the governance structure, right? Because we figure the matter is so complex that further study is required. And the expected outcome in that regard is a proposal for further improving efficiency.
You're watching ECCB Connects, protecting our currency, developing our region. To view any episode of ECCB Connects anytime, any place, at your convenience, check us out on YouTube or Facebook at ECCB Connects.
We've come to the end of this week's episode of ECCB Connects. Thank you very much for watching, and do join us again next week when we'll be back with another program.